Please feel free to get some food if you haven't yet. Coffee, whatever, refill. Do all that before we have the presentation start. I'm Kathy Underwood, President and CEO of Ledger National Bank. I'd like to welcome everybody here today. We do have some new faces to our Leading Women group, which is very, very exciting. And we actually have a little bit of a larger crowd than usual, so it must have something to do with the topic. Certainly a very timely topic. For those of you that are new to our group, Leading Women is a program that Ledger Bank sponsors that is for women who own or manage their business. And our goal is to help women run their businesses more effectively, more efficiently. As you may know, Ledger's tagline is Plan Well, Live Well. And that carries through for not only individuals, but businesses. The more and better you can plan, the better you'll do. And we understand that a lot of our clients are small businesses that can't afford to have the resources of a human resources staff or a legal department. And so it's our goal to bring to you these experts that can help you. And all of our experts that we bring to you volunteer their time. So we really, really appreciate the folks that come and speak to our Leading Women group. They take their own personal time to do that. The last time that we were together, many of you asked for more networking time. We have the half hour in the morning before the presentation when we're eating to network, but you wanted more time for networking. So if you noticed on the invitation, we have an extra half hour at the end of the presentation for networking opportunities. And on your table is a little sign that has a question that might just prompt discussion afterwards. And hopefully this will give you that opportunity to share your stories with other women who probably have the same challenges and may have some solutions for you. I know not everybody can stay, so it may be that we have to combine a few tables at the end of the session, but we'll see how that goes. So hopefully you can stay and get to know the folks at your table and share stories. You will also note, for those of you that come every time, we've assigned tables this time. I want to shake it up a little. People tend to gravitate to those they know and who they associate with on a day-to-day basis. So we want to shake it up a little so that you are sitting with people that you might not normally sit with, so that, again, you can share stories. At your seat, you'll notice that there is an invitation to a Go Red event. Many of you may remember that we hosted a Go Red breakfast back in February of this year. Dr. Medora, who's here, right here, was our featured speaker. And that breakfast really made an impact on a lot of people's lives. We talked about heart disease in women, signs of a heart attack, ways to avoid heart disease, and the response from that breakfast was pretty powerful. And because of that, Ledger decided that we wanted to take this to the next step. And we are sponsoring a Go Red luncheon, February of 2014, which is an extended version of what you saw at breakfast. It is going to be at the Hanover Inn, and it's going to have education, silent auction, vendors, blood pressure checks, and so on. So I left an invitation at your table. It's kind of exciting to think Leading Women was the instigator of this. But I do encourage you, if you're interested in attending, to buy your ticket quickly, because hard to believe it's half sold out already. And the room holds 300 people. So it's really caught on. So I encourage you to register if you're interested. We always have a featured business, Spotlight on Business, and today we're featuring a spotlight on The Haven. Ledger has what we call adopted The Haven this year as our partner nonprofit. And what that means is we're educating our employee base on The Haven, what The Haven does, and we're volunteering, all our employees are volunteering in different ways at The Haven. We're supporting different programs at The Haven. And it's been a great partnership, and we thought it would be a good opportunity to have Sarah Kowalski from The Haven say a few words on their organization and what they do in our community. So Sarah?
Good morning to all of you. I see many familiar faces in this room, and I also see others who are new to me, and that's always very exciting because it says that there is a portion of the community who I have not yet seen come through the doors at the Haven, which is a place that is open to all of you and would welcome all of you. The Haven has been around here in the Upper Valley community since 1980 over in White River Junction, Vermont on Hartford Avenue, which is Route 5, north of Hartford High School, south of that Wilder exit, that funny place in between White River and Hanover. There really is something along the road there. And we're part of it in our 3-building campus running along Route 5. And we've only been 3 buildings since 2010, really, in terms of active use. One building has our shelter for adults without children with them, men, women, and couples, holding 20 people at a time, although we have, in a most somber kind of way, found a need to stick in about 22 at a time. Our main building has our shelter for 8 families, as well as the food shelf, clothing room, and our community case management functions. And then Bev's house, as the community center, is alive with children between 2:30 and 5 every afternoon with our after-school program. But the rest of the time, it's a place that is open for community meetings and gatherings, ranging from the White River Elementary School Brownie Scout troop that meets once a week to an AA meeting that occurs every Saturday and an NA, Narcotics Anonymous meeting, that happens Sunday nights. There's lots going on in that community center building there. The Ledyard partners that we've had this year have brought a great deal of energy to us, and I think that they have been a real demonstration of what the feeling and the spirit of the Haven is, and that's why I welcome you to come and to discover for yourselves. I think those people who have helped in collecting food and then coming and working in the food shelf have found themselves laughing and having fun at the same time that they have been helping others with that basic survival access to food. The folks who have volunteered at the clothing room have turned into, fashion experts and consultants, and have made the Haven Boutique not only a place where people can get free clothing for those things that they really need, but also have that ultimate, retail therapy experience where you can shop and you don't even have to take anything if you don't want to. It's amazing if you have no money in your pocket. Where can you go and you don't feel badly about just doing that thing that so many of us do, about browsing through racks and things? We see people doing that in the Haven every day and come out with a smile. And so the things that you donate as clothing not only help to clothe people, they help to bring a small piece of pleasure to people whose lives otherwise have a great deal of stress and grimness to them. And then the supper program at the adult shelter, the joy of cooking together, which is something that many people share. And again, we found that we've got some amazing cooks among the people who need shelter. And so there's a great reciprocity that goes on between those volunteers who come in to help and those people who are needing those services. The same is going on in the after-school program. Kathy was telling me about a story she heard about peanut butter and celery and a little boy, and one in the celery and the one in the mouth, and but that was a story she heard from one of the Ledyard staff people who had come to volunteer in that program. Overall, it's a place that has great depth and great poignancy of life experience. Folks with tremendous need come because they don't know where else to turn. People with opportunity to help and to make a difference in very small ways and in very large ways are part of creating our community. Those of you who've been part of doing this and recognize these stories that I'm telling, I can only thank you for making the haven, being the haven. And for those of you for whom this is new, I invite you to come and join and be part of it too, as you are in a circle like this. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. My daughter and I worked in the clothing room, and we're sorting the clothes, and she's picking out, oh, look at these shoes. Aren't these just the coolest? Like, put them down, put them down. Look at this sweater. So I'm not bringing her anymore to the clothing place, because she wanted to take everything home with her.
Well, she would have been allowed to take a couple things.
All right, it's time for the featured program, and today we have a couple of folks here joining us who are experts in the healthcare field. Obviously, a topic of top of mind for many of us in a lot of ways. Many of us have employees that we're concerned about how to continue to provide healthcare for. There are many people here who are on the other end that are providing healthcare services to the community, and this change in our healthcare is certainly going to affect many of us in many, many ways. Excuse me for reading, but you had the biographies on your invitation. But I do want to introduce today Liz Bailey and Matt LaPointe. They are, as I said, both experts on this topic. Liz's practice is in employment and labor law. She represents both private and public employers. Her practice includes counseling and training employers about ways to effectively avoid or defend against employment disputes or claims. The rest, as I said, is on your invitation. Matt LaPointe represents a variety of entrepreneurial and closely held businesses. He serves as general outside counsel to a number of companies, counseling business owners on financing, succession planning, corporate governance, and general business matters. Thank you very much for the chocolate from She and Finny from their organization. It's a great way to start our day, keep us alive during the presentation. And thank you both for volunteering to be here and share with us what you know about this timely topic. Who's going first? Liz, thank you.
Thank you very much. I have the easy job today, which is essentially introducing Matt. When Sarah and I talked a few months ago, she said, would you like to come here and talk about the Affordable Care Act? And I said, I would love to do that, but I know somebody who could do it better. Oh, I'm sorry. Right. Thank you. I know somebody that would really want to hear from, and that would be Matt LaPointe, my law partner. Our law firm is a full-service law firm. We have locations in Manchester, Boston, and Hanover, and as well as Concord. And Matt has really made it a point of being the point person in our firm that has kind of taken it upon himself, and God love him, to be the go-to guy about the Affordable Care Act. And so what we've done today is pretty much recognize that if, this is such a comprehensive piece of legislation, and it, as we can all appreciate, has been evolving, it seems like, on a monthly or a basis, that it's really hard to keep up on. But what we've tried to do is to give you in your materials a little something to take away and take home. So we have a copy of the PowerPoint that Matt's going to be going through with you today, but also kind of a more detailed article that he wrote for our annual private sector seminar that we put on in the spring of every year. So that's from this past spring, and then an update more recently about the employer mandated developments with that. So we do hope that with the totality of the materials, you have something that you can take away with you that can be of help to you as you're thinking about these issues, particularly from October 1st through the beginning of this year. And that would be a useful tool in your toolkit as you're dealing with these Affordable Care Act issues. So I turn this over to Matt LaPointe, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm going to see if my wireless works. Can everybody hear me? on that wireless? Okay, good. Yeah, thank you very much for that introduction, Kathy. It's great to work with Ledyard Bank. As you probably know, my partner here in the Hanover office, John Leland, has done a fair bit of work with your bank. Always speaks very highly of your organization. So thanks for sponsoring this and for inviting us. As the introduction said, I'm really a general business practitioner. A lot of times when I talk to small business people, I talk about the fact that big companies have the wherewithal and the resources to oftentimes hire their own in-house counsel. They have a lawyer who goes through stuff like this, and that's his or her full-time job, is keeping the company on track with all kinds of regulations. But the smaller businesses obviously can't afford to have an in-house counsel, so I'm an out-house counsel. So my job is to keep the small business people in compliance with the various regulations, and we try to do it by giving seminars like this that give you pretty much an overview, and to the extent you have specific issues that apply to you, we're always willing to talk with you after the program or over the phone. Our information is in the packet. Just give us a call. So, without further ado, today's presentation about Obamacare, and it's okay to call it that now. The president said that's all right. He doesn't mind. It started out a little pejorative, but he's adopted it. I'm going to start with a general overview of the law and what it's trying to accomplish. I'll then talk about the state exchanges, and now they're being called the state marketplaces. The individual mandate, which applies to everybody. The employer mandate, sometimes people have called it the play or pay regulations. Either you're going to do it or you're going to pay a fine. And then at the very end, a few just suggested business strategies for you all to think about how you can address the issue of healthcare in your workplace, kind of aiming towards the smaller businesses. Okay, so the general overview, I thought I'd start with the Supreme Court decision that came out last year. What was going on, of course, is the big thrust of the lawsuit were that the states that were challenging Obamacare were saying, gee, this can't be constitutional. It can't be constitutional to require individuals to buy something they don't want to buy. That requiring somebody to buy health care, to buy health insurance, I should say, how is that possible? How can the government require somebody to buy health insurance? And analysis of the arguments on both sides centered on a clause in the U.S. Constitution called the Commerce Clause that says Congress has the authority to regulate commerce between the states, interstate commerce. And the pro-Obamacare people said the Commerce Clause is very elastic, very broad, and because health care and health insurance is an interstate commerce, then regulating it, including requiring people to buy it, the Commerce Clause accommodates that, and Congress does have the authority to do that. Those on the other side said, well, wait a minute, the Commerce Clause can't mean just about anything. I mean, it's got to have some limit, and this seems to us to push the limit. To require somebody to buy something seems to push the limit. Well, about a year, let's see, it was probably May of 2012, I predicted that the Supreme Court was going to uphold Obamacare. Everybody in the audience, when they did, went, oh, like that. But I was studying this stuff, and I thought, no, I think the Commerce Clause can do it. And I thought that would be the hook that the Supreme Court used to uphold it. Well, I was right that it was upheld, but I was wrong for the reason. To my surprise, Justice Roberts, one of the most conservative justices on the court, wrote the opinion upholding the law, which shocked a lot of conservatives, I think, and surprised me. And what Justice Roberts did was something nobody had really thought much about. He picked on sort of, when you're a lawyer and you make an argument to a court, you always make two or three. You want to give the court as many possibilities to uphold your case as you can. And so the Commerce Clause was the big one. That's what everybody concentrated on. But the third argument was this thing involving taxation. And the argument was, we're not requiring people to buy health care. We're just saying if you don't, you have to pay tax. That's all, just a tax. So that's what Justice Roberts latched on to. And he said, Congress has very broad power to tax. And that's all they've done. They've imposed a tax. And they said, if you don't get health insurance, you're going to have to pay this extra tax. Of course, when President Obama was running, he never called it a tax. You can't ever use the word tax when you're running for president. He called it a fee. Justice Roberts called it a tax, and that's how it was upheld. We're also, how are people going to get this insurance? This again, the individual mandate. Everybody starting Jan 1, 2014, individuals have to have health insurance. If they don't get it through their employer, they have to get it themselves. How are they going to get it? Through a health insurance exchange. The other thing that the healthcare law aimed to do was reform how healthcare is delivered and try to bring down the cost, or at least slow down the increase in costs. And those are what we call the health insurance reforms part of Obamacare. Those health insurance reforms, many of which have already come into play. Remember, this went into effect in what, 09? I think it was passed in 09 or maybe it was 2010. It's been each year rolled out in stages. So already we do see this MLR rebates, for example, that's going on. That started in August of 2012. That stands for medical loss ratio. And insurance companies now are required to use at least 85% of their premium dollars to actually delivering health care. That's for large employer, large group plans, and 80% for small group plans. And if they don't, if it turns out that they use only 75% of their funds, of their premium dollars actually in the delivery of care, the difference has to be rebated, has to be given back to those people who paid the premiums. And that's already happened. People have gotten these rebates. Pre-existing condition limitations, that ends Jan 1, 2014. Lifetime and annual limits on how much your insurance will cover, that goes away Jan 1, 2014. So a lot of these insurance reforms have already gone in place. Another one some of you are familiar with is raising the age that dependents can remain on their parents' policy to age 26. That's a reform that was made. So the Obamacare did a lot in the way of reforming insurance and restricting what insurance companies could do, trying to hit some of the perceived abuses that the health insurance companies were doing. And then finally, the law includes reforms aimed at improving healthcare outcomes and holding down costs. Those are things like something called accountable care organizations. That came right out of Dartmouth Medical School. People, very, very smart people at Dartmouth have been preaching this notion of having a medical home, having a place where the doctors, improving the communication between the doctors that serve you, so that your primary care physician, your cardiologist expert, your whatever the case may be, the people managing your diabetes, that they all work together and that they share information to keep you healthy rather than treat you when you're sick. So that is some of the reforms that are being put out through Obamacare to try to improve healthcare outcomes. And hopefully, of course, doing that, reduce costs. Now, the whole idea of the individual mandate, of course, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, is the way insurance works, right, is you try to spread risk. And by the theory behind this part of the law is that by including more people in the risk pool, it should reduce the cost of the insurance. right now, we're in a situation where a lot of younger, healthier people don't sign up for health insurance because they don't feel they need it. They get sick very infrequently, and when they do, they go to the doctor and pay out of pocket. If we could get those people into the pool, then they're paying into the pool, not drawing out of the pool as much, and it helps stabilize the pool, thus hopefully bringing costs down. And that's how insurance works in every way. Car insurance, house insurance. I mean, people who have homes near the water pay more because it's potential flooding or potential hurricanes or what have you. People who live upland don't have those issues but might have wind issues. The idea is everybody pays in, and yes, it's true, some people pay in and never get a claim, never make a claim. They pay all that money for insurance, never get a claim. But others who pay in have claims, it all kind of evens out. That's the idea of health insurance, of insurance in general. And that was why the individual mandate and the employer mandates were so integral to this plan, is to try to increase the number of people on insurance. It's also something that's going to help our hospitals who do so much uncompensated care. People who don't have insurance still go to the hospital. People who have a car accident but don't have auto insurance or health insurance still get fixed up. But those costs are spread around to all of us who do have insurance. And that's why our premiums are higher to cover uncompensated care. All of this is a finely woven mesh to try to address a number of these issues. Whether it will work or not is remains to be seen. So what is the health insurance exchange or the health insurance marketplace? Well, as we said, when individuals need to get their insurance, this is the primary place they're going to be able to get it. It's a web-based tool, a website that you can go on. It's been described as Orbitz or Expedia or Travelocity of healthcare. So if you've ever been on any of those travel sites, what they do is you plug in where you want to go, and they'll give you 4 or 5 different airlines that go there and the price. And so you can pick and choose. The idea is to apply that to health insurance. So when you go to the exchange, you'll be able to choose between different levels of plans, and you'll be able to pick and compare prices of different insurance companies. There is an important thing here, my first bullet. All of you need to know, anybody who has an employee, one employee, has to give a notice to the employees of the existence of this health insurance exchange, this health insurance marketplace. And October 1, 2013 is the deadline for you to provide this notice. And there are model notices available. They're quite good and easy to use. I've been on the website, check them out. And they're at this URL. And that's in, you don't even have to copy it down, it's in your materials. So if you haven't done that yet, and there's one thing you take away, do that so you don't get in trouble for not providing that notice. The other aspect of Obamacare is the writers of the law recognize that, hey, if we're going to require individuals to buy insurance, let's face it, there's lots of individuals who cannot afford insurance. It's just too expensive. So there's a system of subsidies and tax credits that will enable, we hope, individuals to afford the health insurance that they're required to buy. The subsidies are only available through these state exchanges, and they apply on a sliding scale for those earning up to 400% of the federal poverty level. Federal poverty level this year, that might be a 2012 number actually, is $11,490 for an individual, $23,550 for a family of 4. So I did the math for you. A 400% is about $46,000 a year for an individual and $94,200 for a family of 4. So up to those numbers, you can expect to get some kind of subsidy. Once you hit a family of 4 with a family income of $94,200, the subsidy is not going to be available to you anymore. This last bullet here, it's unavailable if the employer offers qualified coverage. We're going to get to that when I talk about the employer mandate. But the idea here is if your employer your employer, in general, if your employer offers insurance, that's where you ought to get it. If your employer doesn't offer insurance, that's when you go to the exchange. Sometimes, even if your employer offers insurance, it's too expensive. And sometimes the insurance they offer is not very good. We'll talk about that later. If those criteria apply, you can still get your insurance through the exchange. This is just a very basic level of what we think the exchange is going to look like. This is starting October 1, 2013. There are generally going to be 4 plan levels for individuals: a bronze, silver, and a gold, and a platinum. And the notion here is that they cover more stuff the higher the designation. So the bronze plan covers 60% of all healthcare costs. That'll have higher deductibles, higher copays. The platinum plan covers 90%, will have lower deductibles, lower copays. Of course, we expect the premiums to be much higher for the platinum than for the bronze, but that's the general idea. And then small businesses with fewer than 50 employees, there is supposed to be availability for you to shop on the exchange to get insurance for your business, if you wish, as well. That too will have a 60% minimum plan value. And this one here is a little less sure than the individual insurance options. Those states that are doing their own exchanges have been able to implement this. It's called the SHOP program, and I forget what SHOP stands for, Small Health Option Plan. Small Business Health Option Plan. And those states that are doing their own exchanges are having better luck with this. Those that are relying on the federal government to run their exchange, or those with sort of hybrid exchanges, like New Hampshire is kind of a hybrid exchange, they're having a bit of a harder time. The government has given them to 2015 to implement this small business aspect of the health insurance exchange. So I'm not sure whether that's going to be available in New Hampshire come October 1, 2014. If it is, I kind of doubt it's going to be very competitive. I have a feeling so far I've heard that only one insurance company is offering a plan, and so this notion of comparing different insurance companies isn't going to come to fruition. Even in the individual market, my understanding is on the individual plans, only one insurance company, I think it's Anthem, is going to be providing these bronze, silver, gold, platinum. So this idea of comparison shopping for insurance company versus insurance company doesn't seem to be playing out quite yet. Part of the reason for that is insurance companies are kind of scared about it. The reason they're kind of scared about it is they don't know who's going to sign up. And they fear that it's going to be older folks, it's going to be folks with pre-existing conditions, it's going to be people who are going to be expensive, who are going to use a lot of care. Because face it, those people with pre-existing conditions haven't been able to buy insurance at all, or they've been able to go into the high-risk pool, which is very expensive. And so a lot of those people, we think, are going to be looking at the exchange to get their insurance. And the insurance companies are worried about that because they have to set the prices in advance and then take the risk that the utilization is much higher than what they expected. So that's why we see a slow participation in these exchanges. And we're hopeful that as the program rolls out, maybe 2014 there'll only be one insurance company, but maybe 2015, 2016 there'll be others that will join. They'll throw their hat in the ring and say, yeah, okay, we can make money on that and do it. We'll just have to see how that goes. Again, we talked about this. Maybe I went the wrong way. Let's see. Yeah, okay. So we talked about the insurance exchange marketplace, the deadline of October 1, and the model notices. So this individual mandate applies effective January 2014. All individuals have to buy insurance. There are limited exceptions, like religious exceptions, if you can show, although they're not easy to prove, but if you can show a firmly held religious belief that you do not use medical practitioners and Christian Science practitioner, for example, you can be accepted, get an out. but they're rare, and it's gonna take some paperwork to prove to the government that you legitimately, for religious reasons, don't use health care. And then there are penalties for failure to comply. Right now, the penalty is $95 or up to a greater of 1% of your household income. That's $95 for an adult, $47.50 for a child, $285 for a family, up to 1% of your income if you do not obtain the insurance that you're supposed to get. That's the tax that Justice Roberts hung his hat on for upholding the law. Those numbers, those penalties are pretty small, if you may be thinking about it, compared to what it's going to cost you to buy the insurance. A lot of people may say, you know what, I think I'll just skip the insurance and pay the tax. That's not, I mean, that is a viable alternative to think about. The tax is going to be collected through your individual tax return. So if you're entitled to a refund, the government will be able to hold back that tax from your refund. If you don't pay tax, if you don't file an income tax, worry how they're going to collect it from you. Quite honestly, I don't think they are. I don't think they can. But that's how the law was written. And these minimum penalties will increase. Up in 2016, they're going up quite substantially, up to the $690, from $95 to $695, from $285 to $2,085. So as this thing gets more entrenched, hopefully as more insurance companies participate, there'll be more of an incentive for you to get the individual coverage. Now, what about the employer mandate? That's what has been in the news quite a bit, because originally both the individual mandate and the employer mandate were slated to begin January 1, 2014. And this summer, the Obama administration announced they were pushing back the effective date for the employer mandate to January 1, 2015, giving a year's reprieve for companies to whom this applies to prepare for it. Who does it apply to? It applies to what the regulations call applicable large employers. Applicable large employers have 50 or greater full-time equivalents. Just so I know how long I should spend on this particular topic, how many people in the room work for a company that has 50 or more full-time equivalents? Few. So it's worth talking about. All right. What that means is, first of all, if you have 50 or more full-time equivalents, your company will pay a penalty if, one, it does not offer health insurance at all, and at least one of your full-time employees goes to the exchange to get their insurance and receives a subsidy. Okay? So if you don't offer insurance at all, and one of your employees says, well, I have to get insurance, individual mandate says I have to get it, I'm going to go to the exchange. And if it turns out when they go to the exchange, they earn less than 4 times the poverty level and are entitled to get a subsidy to buy that insurance, then you, the company, are going to pay a tax, you're going to pay a penalty. So there's 2 ways you can pay a penalty. That's the first way. And these are found in the Internal Revenue Code, if you really care. 4980H little a is the first one, and 4980H little b is the second. The second one is if you're an employer and you offer your full-time employees coverage, you are kind of doing the right thing, offering them coverage, but at least one of your employees still goes to the exchange thinking, I might be able to get it cheaper. Either because that particular employee is in a class to whom you do not offer insurance, or because the coverage that was offered was either, quote, unaffordable, or, quote, did not provide minimum value. And we'll talk about it. Bear with me. I'll explain what unaffordable means and what minimum value means. But for now, that's the gist of it. 2 ways you can be fined if you're a big company. One is if you don't offer insurance at all and somebody goes to the exchange, gets a subsidy. 2, if you offer insurance, but somebody still goes to the exchange because it's quote unaffordable, or because the insurance you provide doesn't meet the minimum requirements. So the first thing is, how do you determine whether you're a large employer? How do you determine whether you have 50 or more full-time equivalents? Sounds easy, right? Just count. But it's not that easy. And the reason it's not that easy is a couple of things. First, the Internal Revenue Code aggregation rules apply. So if you are part of a controlled group or an affiliated service group, you have to count all those employees in that group. What the heck does this mean? What this means is some of you who are in large companies may be an affiliate of another company, or maybe a parent or a subsidiary or a relationship, where you may have different related companies or companies owned by the same people. Under the Internal Revenue Code dealing with pension plans, called ERISA, E-R-I-S-A, Employee Retirement Income Security Act, these controlled group and affiliated service group designations were put into the tax code to make sure that those companies that were related were governed by ERISA in the same way. They borrowed from ERISA for the Obamacare law, and if you are a controlled group or an affiliated service group, you have to count all the employees of the group. So the 3 related companies, you have to add them all up, and if they all together are over 50, it applies to you. The second thing is how to count your full-time employees. What if you have seasonal employees? What if you run a ski area or an amusement park or a baseball team? One of our clients is a baseball team. We dealt with this issue. There is an exception about seasonal employees. I'll get to that in a minute. So you add up your full-time employees. What is full-time? Up until recently, I was thought full-time was 40 hours a week. Under Obamacare, it's 30 hours a week. So if somebody works 30 hours or more, they're considered full-time. And then you have to figure out full-time equivalents for all your part-timers. To calculate your full-time equivalents, you use 30 hours a week, and you add them all up. So you get your full-time equivalents, and then you get your full-times, you add them up. If it's 50 or greater, you're in the large employer category. If it's 50, if it's less than 50, you're not a large employer. If your result is over 50 and you have seasonal employees, then there's a seasonal exception. If the workforce exceeds 50 full-time employees for 120 days or fewer during a calendar year, and the employees that push you over that 50 are seasonal, then you're not an applicable large employer. It's complicated, and the best way to do it, if you're in this category, if you're worried about seasonals, is to make a chart for each month and write down the number of full-time employees, full-time equivalents, and seasonals, and add them up and see how it works out. And I don't want to spend too much more time on the minutia of that thing, but I've been able to help many large companies figure out whether they're in or out. And I've also been able to help some large companies make some decisions about when they hire and when they lay off those seasonals to keep them under that threshold. So there is some degree of manipulating how you hire when you lay off that can help you stay out of this requirement. Now, I told you I would tell you what minimum value and what affordable meant, and here it is. Affordable, remember this relates to the second way that you can be fined if you're a 50 or more employee shop, and the first is if you don't offer insurance at all. This applies if you do offer insurance. Is the insurance good enough? This is kind of the issue. And the first is if it's whether it's affordable. Affordability means the employee's cost of the insurance, okay, the employee's contribution, must not exceed more than 9.5% of household income. I put household in italics. Anybody want to know why? Well, how the heck are you supposed to know what the household income is of your employee? I thought that was a little weird. But 9.5% of household income is the threshold. And then the minimum value issue is if the plan fails to provide, the plan does fail to provide minimum value if its share of the total allowed cost of the benefits provided with the plan is less than 60%. So remember when we were looking at that chart about the plans that are available on the exchange, the very lowest one, the bronze plan, was 60%, covers 60% of all covered costs. That's the floor that the Obamacare sets. And so if your plan doesn't cover at least 60%, it's not a minimum, it doesn't mean minimum value. And your employee can go to the exchange and get one, the bronze plan that has minimum value, you're going to be paying a fine. Likewise, if you provide great insurance, but it's just too darn expensive, you've got low-paid workers for whom remember, not just their cost, not the whole amount of the premium, but their cost exceeds 9.5% of their household income. It's unaffordable. They go to the exchange and get it. You're going to get a fine. Before I go, I'll talk a little bit about this household issue. The IRS has come out with what they call safe harbors as to what they feel is a proxy that you can use for household income and not be penalized. And none of them are terribly satisfying as far as I'm concerned, but it's better than nothing. The first one is using the person's W-2 income. Just basically assuming that your employee is the only wage earner in that family and using that number. I think that's probably going to include more people than it sets a very low bar for affordability, I think, because most people do are two income families nowadays. But that's a safe harbor you can use. Other safe harbors have to do with looking at the hourly rates that they're paid and taking an average, and it's all in the IRS regs. I think it's a little too much in the weeds for today's presentation. But an alternative that you could do also, though, is prepare a certificate and have your employee certify to you that either the amount they're paying does or doesn't exceed 9.5% of their household income. You don't have to ask them how much their household income is. You just say, certify to me that either it does or it doesn't. And if it's not affordable, if the cost does exceed 9.5% of their household income, think about maybe increasing the employer contribution so that the employee doesn't have to pay as much. Talk to your insurance brokers about seeing what you can do to tweak the plan to get your premium down a little lower. There are things you can do to avoid having to pay a penalty. We talked about how you have to pay, what the sort of criteria are that trigger the penalty, but I haven't actually told you what the penalties are. This is what the penalties are. If you don't offer coverage at all, that's the 4980HA. If you don't offer coverage at all, and at least one full-time employee does go to the exchange, you're going to have to pay $2,000 per every full-time employee, not just the one who got the subsidy, but the first 30 are free. Why they make it so damn hard to calculate the size? Why didn't you just make it $500 and cover everybody instead of $2,000 but the first 30 are free? But anyway, that's the deal. The second penalty, remember, is if you do offer insurance, but it's either not affordable or it doesn't meet that minimum value. And in that case, the fine is $3,000, but it's only 3,000 times the actual number of employees who are getting insurance through the exchange and who are getting a subsidy. With a maximum, in other words, this fine can never exceed what this fine would have been. The policy reason being they want to encourage you to provide insurance, even if it's not quite adequate. If you provide something, it's better than providing nothing at all. I thought I'd just run through one simple affordability example because I'm sure a lot of you would think, gee, I wonder if my plan is affordable under this new 9.5% thing. I consulted with an employee benefits broker friend of mine just to find out whether my example numbers are reasonable, are realistic, and he told me they were. So I just took sort of an average typical New Hampshire HMO plan with a $1,000 individual deductible and a $2,000 family deductible, the monthly premium for an individual would be $400. Annually, that's $4,800. And you do use the individual premium as the benchmark, not the family plan. So what would the employee's monthly contribution be in a typical situation where the employer pays 70% and the employee pays 30%? It would be this $120 an annual of $1,440. And as we said, the contribution, if we use that W-2 safe harbor, the employee's contribution can't be more than 9.5% of that employee's wages. So a contribution of $1,440 equals the following as a percent of wages of the W-2. So I just sort of went through an example. And for example, if you have an employee who gets $40,000 a year, who's paying $1,440 a year as his 30% contribution, that's 3.6% of wages, well below the 9.5% that you have to worry about. And in fact, using this example, and again, I admit this might be a pie-in-the-sky example, but I don't think so. You have to have an employee with annual wages below $15,000, or no, at or below $15,000 for it to exceed 9.5% of wages. And that would be impossible because Liz would tell you that's below the minimum wage. You'd have bigger problems. A lot bigger problems than worrying about the affordability under Obamacare. So, just an example. And maybe you want to look at what you pay and how much it costs and how much you pay people. So is there a problem with the math that people?
Well, not at, I think the restaurant workers, were being back 30 hours or less.
Yeah.
At 30 hours, at $8 an hour, that's $1,040.
At 30 hours, at
Can you repeat the question? Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, I'm trying to. But the math was hard for me to keep track of. But what we heard was that this may actually be an issue for example, a restaurant where the people do get close to minimum wage, and I understand minimum wage is lower for servers because of tip income and stuff. So I'm not trying to say it's not going to be a problem for anybody. I'm just saying for the typical company, it probably isn't a problem, but it's certainly something you have to look at. Yeah.
How does part-time workers work into this?
They don't, because part-time workers are not required. You are not required to offer insurance to part-time workers under Obamacare.
So under
Only
30.
full-time employers. So under 30 hours a week, you do not have to offer insurance to them. The expectation, I guess, is they're going to get it on the exchange. Yes.
Are we still talking about the large employer?
We
or-
are.
Okay.
We're still talking about people with 50 employees or more. So you can still keep the hearing aid turned off.
I do. Click.
If you have fewer than 50 employees.
So I guess in the news, there's been a number of large national retail chains that are cutting all their workers' hours down to
That has been,
like 28. Yeah, is that, they're not going to be penalized for that? There's no.
The question is, there's been in the news that a lot of large employers, like retail employers, are thinking, and I know like McDonald's and places like that have been talking about this too. They're going to just cut everybody's hours to below 30, so that they don't have to offer insurance to them. And the question was, are companies who do that going to pay any kind of a penalty? And the answer is no. The law says 30 hours is the deal, and if you don't work 30 hours, you're not entitled to it. And so it's not a very nice thing for those companies to do, but it's a perfectly legal thing for them to do. Let's see, where am I already there? Wow. So, I thought I would try to give some suggested strategies, and then we'll have some more question and answer from it. So if we've got companies now, I'm talking smaller companies, below 50 employees, full-time equivalents. One great thing in Obamacare that I think not a lot of people are quite aware of is there is a small business health insurance tax credit available. It's not the easiest thing to qualify for. It's pretty strict requirements. But if you qualify for it, it's very good. You have to have fewer than 25 full-time equivalents. You have to pay an average wage of less than $50,000 a year. And by the way, that average excludes the owner of the company. So if the owner of the company makes a lot of money, that doesn't skew your average up. You don't have to count the owner's salary. But if the average wage of non-owner employees is less than $50,000 a year, there are fewer than 25 full-time equivalents, and the company pays at least 50% of the premium. Employee pays 50, employer pays 50 at least. Then you're eligible for these tax credits, and the tax credits are significant. In 2013, a full credit for 35% of your health insurance costs. It goes up in 2014 to a 50% credit. I thought I'd give you a little example. Take an auto repair shop, right, full-time employee. So I had an example auto repair shop, 10 employees, wages total $250,000, excluding the owner. That comes out to $25,000 per worker on average, which is below the threshold. Remember, we'll just flip back here. Less than $50,000 a year average, fewer than 25 full-time equivalents. And in this case, the employer does pay half of the premium costs. The total healthcare costs for that company over the course of a year is $70,000. Their tax credit for 2013 would be $24,500. Significant tax credit. So if you haven't thought about this, if you haven't heard about this, call your accountant and see whether you qualify. Well, you may know whether you qualify, or whether you have 25 full-time equivalents. You certainly know that. You may not know your average wage, but you can figure it out. And then whether or not you pay half the premium. But that's a very good thing in Obamacare that hasn't been talked very
Does that
about
count for
very
a
much.
business with one employee?
Pardon me?
Does that count for a business with one full-time employee?
I think it would. Yeah. If it's fewer than 25, it would apply. Another strategy you should think about is the shop exchange. We talked a little bit about that. As I said, unfortunately, in New Hampshire anyway, and I apologize, I'm really not that familiar with what's going on over in Vermont, but in the New Hampshire exchange, my understanding is they either won't have it available at all for small businesses quite yet, or if they do, there's only going to be one option. But keep your eyes out for 2015. Keep your finger on this pulse, because it's very possible it's going to be a good place for small businesses to go and get coverage. Another idea is how you can help your employees pay for some of this coverage. Even if you don't adopt a plan for yourself, if you're a small company, you don't get a small company plan, you can still help your employees. And they will be getting their insurance through the exchange. And as we said, some of them may be eligible for subsidies. It's still going to be expensive. And one way you might be able to help them is to set up a cafeteria plan, a 125 plan. And for you, the employer, to put money into the 125 plan on behalf of your employees. And your employees can then use that for non-reimbursed expenses like co-pays and pharmaceuticals, eyeglasses, stuff like that. So that's a way you can help your employees afford to get the coverage that they need. And you'll be contributing something to their health care without having to adopt a health plan. This is a weird thing in the way the IRS regulations work. And boy, it took me a while to figure this out. I had my tax partner on the phone for a while. But it turns out, as you probably know, any of you who are familiar with FSAs, flexible spending accounts, Section 125 plans, usually it's the employee who puts the money in. They have the money taken out of their check on a tax-free basis. It goes in, and then they can use it to buy prescription drugs, et cetera, on a tax-advantaged basis. What I was just talking about is having the employer put money in for them. So everything I said is true. The employer can put money into the FSA. The employee can use that money for all the things I talked about. They can also use that money to help pay for the actual premiums of what they're buying on the exchange. The weird thing is, an employee cannot take money out of their paycheck on a tax-free basis, put it into the FSA, and then use that money to buy insurance on the exchange. They can use employer money to buy insurance on the exchange, but they can't use employee money to buy it on the exchange. And it has to do with arcane and esoteric things in the tax code, but it's bizarre that that's the case, I think, and I think this should be fixed. And it's being talked about in circles, not circles that I participated in, but circles that help, that tax lawyers talk about. This has been mentioned that they really should fix this. They should allow employees to use tax advantage dollars, tax-free dollars to buy their insurance. Why not? Employers can use tax. It's tax deductible to the employer when they buy these insurance, when they pay these insurance premiums. Why should it be to the employee? But that's the story. I think I had just another one. Yeah. You can also consider, talking to a good benefits broker about other alternatives. Things like critical illness policies, policies that only cover cancer, for example, or other critical illnesses. They're very, very inexpensive, but it's better than nothing, and you could offer that to your employees. There are these so-called gap policies, like an Aflac type of a policy, where if somebody is sick and they can't work, it pays them a certain amount of money every day for while they're out with that illness or that injury. Again, now these aren't things that are health plans. These are not plans that the employer adopts, but they're ways that you can provide some additional benefits to your employees to kind of bridge this gap between having nothing at all and having full-blown health insurance. And I think a good health insurance agent, a good benefits broker, ought to be able to talk to you about different options. Even you, the small 2 or 3 employee shop, there are things you can do to benefit your employees. It might not cost that much money. And in fact, like Aflac, need not cost you any money. The employee can pay for it out of their paycheck, and it's, like I said, relatively short dollars. But you look good for having brought the Aflac guy into the office and talk to your employees about it. Employees can sign up if they want to. And there are other, I should have said just Aflac. There are other companies that offer the same kind of thing. It's not an Aflac. Some resources for you to learn more about this. One, call me and take me to lunch. Cheap. I won't get the lobster. I'll talk about it. But you can also go to the New Hampshire Insurance Department. It has some stuff on there. The U.S. Department of Labor, I think, is a great website with very helpful information. I already talked about the forms that they have available on there. But I find I go to the U.S. Department of Labor site often when I get calls for questions. They have a great set of frequently asked questions. That's like, they're up to volume 22 or something. Every month or so they come out with new frequently asked questions. So there are a lot of questions being asked frequently. But I find those very useful. And then, of course, the good old Internal Revenue Service has some good stuff about that tax credit that I was talking about earlier, and about the issues of counting who's a full-time employee. Do I meet that 50 threshold? Those regulations can be found on the IRS website. Good luck deciphering them, but then that's all I have today. I'd be happy to answer some questions. Why don't we start back? Yep.
Hi, I wondered if you had any insight as to why there is a gap between employers with 25 or more full-time employees to 50. A small employer who falls into that gap has no benefit from the shop exchange or ability to supplement in that fashion. Granted, they don't have to offer health insurance, but
Right.
there's really nothing in that gap. And do you have any insight as to why that is?
I'm afraid I don't. I don't know why it was, the law was written that way. I'm sorry. I don't know. I agree with you. I can't really think of a policy reason, a public policy reason why they would do that. Usually when there's no visible public policy reason, it's because there was some lobbyist that wanted it that way. And I don't know
Okay.
why. Sorry.
Well, it's an interesting gap.
It is, yeah. Yes.
If you're a small business and you do qualify for the tax credit, are you required to provide insurance that is affordable and is of minimum value?
The question was, if you qualify for that tax credit that we talked about, and you do provide insurance, does it have to be affordable and meet that minimum value? And the answer is yes on the minimum value, no on the affordability. So there is a certain baseline of health insurance that you have to meet for it to be considered a real health insurance plan. Like that critical illness policy would not qualify. But if it's a true health plan that covers the full gambit of health issues, it does qualify. And because you're under 50, you don't have to meet that requirement of affordability. You do have to pay at least 50% of the premium requirement. That's part of the criteria for getting that credit. So that's your answer there. Yes, ma'am.
Does all of this apply to nonprofits, including removing the salary of an executive director versus a president or owner?
The part about removing the salary, the question was, does all of this apply to nonprofits, even the part about taking out the owner's income when you're calculating whether the average is $50,000 or less? The answer is the tax credit does apply to nonprofits, which is pretty wild since they don't pay taxes. In other words, they're going to make money. But no, you can't take your executive director's pay out of the calculation because a nonprofit doesn't have an owner. The person who gets accepted out is the owner, or owners if there are more than one. Nonprofits don't have owners. They do have executive directors who pay salaries, but it's not the same thing.
And all the tax stuff you talked about, the insurance stuff you talked about today is also required in nonprofits?
Yes, if you're a nonprofit with greater than 50 employees, all of that stuff applies to you. Yep. And just as it applies to the state of New Hampshire, for example, the state of New Hampshire has more than 50 employees, they have to offer insurance or pay a penalty. Yes.
Let's save money in that.
I think I should be passing this around so people can hear the questions. It would be a good idea. Here, Tim.
When you're talking about qualifying for that health insurance tax credit and you exclude the owner's salaries, if there's more than one owner of the business, can they all exclude it to come to that calculation?
Yes, I think the answer is yes. There might be some cap or something. I haven't gotten too much into the weeds of those regulations, but your accountant should be able to figure that out. But yes, it says you exclude the owners. Yeah. How are we doing on time?
You're all set, you're fine.
Have time?
There's-
Okay.
Is there a required number, percentage of employees that would need to sign on to the health insurance policy?
To
for
get the
small
credit?
business tax credit?
No. No, there's no minimum participation or anything like that. There was another question at this time. I feel like Phil Donahue, remember that?
What requirements are there of small businesses under 50 in terms of Obamacare? Are there any requirements at all?
You have to provide an exchange notice that we talked about. You have to provide that notice to your employees telling them that these exchanges exist and that that's where they can go to get insurance. And I put the website where you can get that. Are there any others? I don't think so, no.
I was thinking, is there any requirement to provide insurance?
No. As always, up until Obamacare, insurance has always been associated with employment, but there was never any law that said employers have to offer insurance. It's always just a benefit that employers use to retain and attract good employees, but there's no requirement to do it. And what Obamacare did was it introduced a requirement, but it limited it to employers with 50 or more. So if you have fewer than 50 employees, the same law applies. There is no requirement that you offer health insurance. They're trying to encourage you to offer health insurance. That's what the tax credit's all about. And those people who work for employers who do not offer insurance, whether they are more than 50 and they get fined for not offering insurance, or whether they're under 50 and don't offer insurance because they don't have to and because they can't afford it or whatever reason,
Would they still get fined?
those individuals who work for the smaller employers where they don't offer insurance, now they have this exchange where they can go and buy individual insurance. And there's no fine on a small employer under 50 who doesn't offer insurance. That fine only applies to the 50 and older. And that's a big, that's something, a myth that just won't die. I remember, I spend a lot of time in Florida. I live in both places. And I remember seeing on TV our governor in a Dairy Queen. And the guy who owned the Dairy Queen was saying, oh, this is going to kill my business. You know, I can't afford to pay insurance. And then if I don't pay insurance, I got to pay these fines. Wrong. You know, the governor should have said, well, how many employees do you have? He only had 12 employees. That's not true. That guy doesn't have to offer insurance to his employees. And if he doesn't offer the insurance, he doesn't have to pay a fine. So there's a lot of stuff about Obamacare that's sort of being peddled to get people excited about it. Believe me, there's enough that's really in there that's onerous to worry about. We don't need to make stuff up. Yeah.
If an employee is asked to certify that it isn't more than 9.5% of their income, how are they supposed to determine that? Are they supposed to use last year's tax return? Are you supposed to go forward?
Yeah. That was just a suggestion I came up with. I hope it's okay. I'm not, you know, nobody, this is new territory and stuff, so I think that works, but I'm not sure. The safest thing to do is to use the employee's W-2 income from the previous year to calculate whether his expense or her expense exceeds the 9.5% of that W-2 wages. Am I clear? Am I getting that?
Yeah.
That's the safest thing. But if you want to really try to figure out, well, what's the real household income, my suggestion was prepare a form, or call me. I'll prepare a form. Prepare a form that says, I, employee, certify that for tax year just passed, my household income, no, my health insurance, how would I write this? I think I'd say something like, you'd have to say in the form, coming up this year, we're going to pay 60% of your health insurance. Your 40% is going to be X dollars. You certify to me that using last year's household income, that X dollars doesn't exceed 9.5% of that number. And you certify that to me, and you promise that it's true and swear up and down it's true. And you now put that in that person's personnel file. And if anybody ever comes and asks, or somebody comes along and says, hey, your health care is not affordable, you need to pay these fines. You say, well, wait a minute. Here are all these certifications. Everybody said it didn't exceed 9.5% of their household income. I can't see how you fail.
What about new employees?
Say again?
What about new employees?
New employees, it's going to be probably hard to do. I think you're gonna have to use the W-2 method, and you're gonna have to project out what their W-2 wages are gonna be. It's complicated, but we'll do the best we can.
Why do they just, why do you work as household income rather than adjusted gross income on your tax return?
Why do they use household income instead of adjusted gross income on your tax return? I have no idea. You know, I often relish when I say this. I didn't write the laws. I'm just trying to help you understand them. And sometimes I don't understand them either. Yeah, you follow up?
And the other question is, how is the government going to monitor the insurance companies in terms of this 80% mandate?
How is the government going to monitor the insurance companies with
when
regard
they
to the,
When they can play with their balance sheet.
you're talking about the medical loss ratios and the
Yeah.
rebates. Honest to God, I don't know how they're monitoring that, but I know they are. I imagine there's some report. I don't represent any health insurance companies. I know this if I did. I imagine that those health insurance companies have to report to the IRS or to somebody their financials. And they scrutinize those and try to determine how much is actually going for care, and how much is profit, how much is executive salaries and all that kind of jazz. But you're absolutely right. There's a certain amount of fudge that these companies can do. Like I think there's an exception for like marketing or something like that. You know, there are things that they can do. It's certainly true that it's not a perfect system, but it is working because I know I had people calling me last year saying, "Hey, we got a rebate." Here's the question that I got, and that if you haven't thought this through yet, maybe on your drive home, this might hit you. If you get that, if you're an employer, and you sponsor a group health policy, and the insurance company that you use exceeded that medical loss ratio, and they rebate some money to you, whose money is that? Your money, the employer? Is that the money of the employees? You split the premium. Remember, you paid 60%, employee paid 40%. How do you deal with that? Actually, don't just assume it's okay to give it to the employees, because it probably isn't. Look at your plan document to see if there's anything in the plan document about what to do if there's more money in the plan than the plan needs. If there's nothing in the document about it, and there probably isn't, because nobody ever thought this would happen until Obamacare came through. And so if your plan is a couple of years old, it probably doesn't address the issue. But the question is then, okay, under ERISA, this money that comes in, this is planned property. You're an employer, but you have a plan. It's kind of like analogous to a pension plan or a 401k plan. Even though the employer puts a match into that 401k plan, that's not the employer's money. It can't take it back and use it to buy new equipment or whatever. Similarly, a health plan is a plan, just like a pension plan. And funds that belong to that plan belong to that plan. So in reality, what I've recommended when people have asked me this question is, well, when you get that rebate, use it to offset the cost of next year's premiums. Next year's premiums will go up a little bit. Well, maybe for you they won't. You'll be able to use that extra money that you got rebated to subsidize the premiums going forward. But I don't suggest writing a check to your employee and saying, hey, Happy New Year, got a refund from the health insurance company. Yes. Let me go back there, my Bill Donahue information.
So my question is following up on the expense of the premiums. Are there any restrictions thought about for premium increases in the marketplace for groups or individuals?
Are there restrictions on how much they can increase? No, I don't think there are. I don't think there are. I don't know. It's a big law. I'm not sure about that, but I don't think so. My understanding is that it's really trying to, as much as the Republicans were against this, it's really trying to use market forces to try to keep things down. Like I talked about at the very beginning, spreading the risk around, increasing the number of people who are healthy getting insurance. The idea is that that's going to help keep premiums level or at least slow the rate of growth, along with those other health-related efficiency proposals like accountable care organizations and stuff like that. So I don't think there is any kind of like blanket insurance company, thou shalt not increase premiums more than X% a year. I don't believe so, no. Is there somebody else at your table, if you mind just handing the mic over?
What about those employees who get their insurance through their spouse, where we need to report if it's affordable?
No, that's a good question. An interesting little caveat, I don't know what little loophole maybe, of Obamacare is that the law says if you have 50 or more employees, you must provide coverage to your employees and full-time employees and their dependents. It doesn't say spouse. I read it 3 times. It doesn't say spouse. So you don't have to provide spouse coverage. I guess the thinking is, well, the spouse works, they'll get it from their employer, or they'll get it through the exchange. So I don't think I answered your question.
No,
but that is an interesting little nugget nonetheless. What was your question again?
If the employee is declining your insurance because they're getting insurance through their spouse,
Yeah.
do we need to report that that is affordable? Because
No.
they're no longer getting insurance through us.
No, the employee still has that choice. If the spouse's insurance will cover them, and they choose to get the insurance through the spouse, then that's fine. They haven't opted to get the insurance that you offer, and you're not in trouble for that. The question of the affordability of your insurance won't apply to that person, because that person has voluntarily declined to take your insurance. If it's not affordable to that person, it may be a problem for the spouse's employer, but not for you. Very good.
I'll take
Well,
over
thank-
your
well,
Phil
thank you.
Donahue role since you're big video.
Thank you very much.
My question is about the individual rebate. To me, a rebate means you have to cough up the money and then you get the money back eventually. Is there a mechanism in place for how that would be applied to individual policies?
Yes, you're talking about, again, that medical loss ratio where they have to spend 80%.
No, I'm
Oh,
talking about
okay,
the
tell me what you're
individual
talking about.
exchange at the
Oh.
marketplace, where if you're income eligible, you receive a rebate on
Yes.
your policy.
It's
cost.
not exactly, no, if I use the word rebate in that context, I was wrong. It's not a rebate. Think of it more as a subsidy.
So it's immediate upon
Yes,
engagement.
none of us really know exactly how this is going to work, but we think you're going to fill out some forms online, and you're going to put in your income and everything else, and at the bottom it's just going to say, here's what you owe. You know, sort of calculate what your subsidy is in the thing. You know, so like the price without subsidy, your price, you know, including subsidy, here it is. So we think that's how it's going to work. It's going to be sort of all in the computer.
Do you know what the percentage could be, like what they're talking for a subsidy?
No, I only know that it's phased out as you are richer. I know that up to 4 times the poverty line, you'll get no subsidy, but you'll get a big subsidy if you're really down low, very close to the poverty line, and a smaller subsidy as your income increases. But I'm afraid I don't, off the top of my head, know like the percentage. Sorry.
I have a question of whether you know, or maybe anyone else in this room, whether the decision by Anthem about eliminating the other providers, other than Dartmouth mainly, is going to stand, or whether there's any recourse about that.
I'm not sure I know exactly what you're talking about. Here's what I heard about Anthem is the policy that they're offering on the exchange, the policy is the bronze, silver, gold, platinum, that when they went out to try to build the network, okay, who's going to participate in this, that a lot of hospitals and doctors and stuff said, holy cow, you're not offering much money here. We're not going to apply. That's not true.
I don't
Tell me the truth.
It's my understanding, it's one of those outside of that network, I presume. We were never asked.
Okay.
So I think it was some were asked and declined to participate, some were never asked at all.
Very good. Yeah, okay, that sounds right, because I heard Mike Green on the radio yesterday, who's the CEO of Concord Hospital, say they were asked, they just declined to participate because the reimbursement wasn't high enough. So it sounds like it's a little bit of both. Was your question why'd they do that, or will they ask you next year? Or?
Whether we feel that that's going to stand, I know that there was a heavy discussion recently with the state.
Yeah, in other words, will the insurance company, will the New Hampshire Insurance Department say to Anthem, hey, you can't do that, you have to allow whoever wants to participate to participate?
Or if it's not governed by the insurance company, insurance commission doing that, will Anthem have any reason to change their
Okay.
decision?
First, I don't think the insurance department has the authority to require an insurance company to include anybody, I don't think. I think it's voluntary who, like on the one hand, they can't force a provider, a doctor, to participate in any particular reimbursement insurance company. I don't think as well they can force Anthem to include somebody if Anthem doesn't want to include them. Although, because like they have, I'm talking out of school here, it's not my expertise, insurance policies and stuff. But I think they can, I think insurance companies can have credential requirements, for sure. I know they can do that. They can say you have to have a certain baseline of credentials to participate. How they can decide who can participate and who can't, I'm afraid I just don't know. Will Anthem maybe change their tune and want to include more people? Possibly, yes. Again, I think it's a lot of this has to do with the skittishness of being the first on the exchange and getting all those high-risk people who are going to sign up. And I think that's part of why Anthem did what they did. I think they were trying to be really careful about how much money they were going to promise to pay providers because they fear that they're going to have a lot of unhealthy, elderly, whatever, people on this plan. So if it turns out that their fears were unfounded, or if in the future more insurance companies participate competitive to Anthem, their tune may change about broadening their network and including others on their network who aren't currently included. So again, market forces might impose a change on Anthem, but I don't think they can regulate it. I'm not sure, but I don't think the insurance company has the power to regulate it to that degree. Yes?
I have a slightly different question. Thinking about small businesses, we think about our employees very individually, and so I know some of our employees would like to benefit from insurance, and about half would not. Is it possible to differentially compensate to say, okay, you guys, we're going to give you health insurance, and you guys, we're going to give you a little bit more money instead? That's more sort of labor law, I suppose. But
It is, and I might, if I say something wrong, ask Liz to correct me. I think the answer is, if you're talking about adopting an insurance plan, a group insurance plan, I think you can categorize different employees differently, but it has to be on a legitimate basis, not just, and I don't think like age works. I think it has to be like full-time versus part-time. It has to be, maybe geographic, those who live in New Hampshire versus those who commute from out of state. But I don't think you can just say some of you can participate in this plan and others can't. What you can do, of course, is compensate people through cash differently. You can decide how to pay people. You can give people more money if they're buying insurance and less money if they're not, I suppose. I don't know how that can go over well. When they start talking about how much they earn over the water cooler. Let Liz chime in.
I think, and probably many of you have had this experience with your employers, but I think the bigger employers, a lot of times what they do is they don't try to differentiate. Obviously the plan will be the plan, and it may be that you are not eligible if you don't work a certain terms of trying to address the costs, it may be that a bandwidth of people are all eligible to participate, but you are rewarding somebody who elects not to go on their spouse's coverage or what have you, or not do it at all, by, paying them a certain amount that's pretty incentivizing in lieu of taking the coverage. And so that happens a lot, I think, in the bigger employers, which is, we give you a $500, $1,000, $1,500 if you elect not to take our insurance and go on your spouse's coverage. So that's how I've seen it done in kind of the bigger sense.
The only thing I'd caution you there is if you're thinking of doing this to encourage your Medicare eligible people, your older workers, to not take your company insurance, but to take Medicare, don't do it. That's not permitted. Medicare doesn't allow you to give any kind of incentive to encourage an employee to take Medicare, because the government wants you to cover them. They don't want to have you cover them.
We have time for one last question. Do you still have one?
Mine was actually a follow-up comment to the network.
Oh, sure. Yeah, a couple minutes.
I think the insurance company can determine whether a policy meets the network adequacy standard, which means if they're offering a plan to a certain number of individuals and saying, with participation in this plan, we think we have enough providers to meet your care needs.
There you go.
If in fact there aren't enough providers under the plan, then it's not a valid plan.
And the insurance
regulatory
department
commission
can regulate it.
might be able to do that. One option is to have a plan that includes out-of-network coverage. If they're not writing plans that allow that, and their covered people try to get care, and there aren't enough participating providers, that may provide a mechanism to make them accountable. We have to offer coverage to out-of-network providers.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I hadn't thought of it through that way. Exactly. I agree with you 100%. Okay. Thanks. I guess we're done.
Thank you very much. That was fabulous.
Thank you.
And I think I personally have read up on this, but now I know far more than I knew before. So hopefully this was very helpful to all of you. You asked some very good questions. And I think there's still a lot of questions to go as the implementation begins, but we really appreciate your information. And both of you being here today and traveling to us this early morning. And thank you, and thanks She and Vinny for their support. Also, we appreciate it. Couple of gifts.